And this economy and the system, we are clear, cannot and will not meet the needs of humanity and the planet. The COVID-19 public health crisis highlights the deep cracks in the system and the underlying and intersecting crises of economy, climate, militarization, and democracy. This is a global health crisis that is a direct result of neoliberalism, which we are all feeling deeply and intimately. I want to ask each of us to take a moment to remember family, comrades, loved ones who we have lost and who are struggling for their health and their lives today. I want to ask you to take a moment and a breath as we remember, think about, and send love and healing to our folks here and around the world. Thank you. We also want to acknowledge the heroic efforts of all workers sacrificing on the front lines of this pandemic. Nurses, doctors, caregivers, grocery store and farm workers, and I also want to shout out all the parents doing double, triple, quadruple duty out there. All the mamas, the papas, the babas, everybody. This crisis has made crystal clear that the exploitation that many of these workers faced prior to the virus, I'm sorry, let me start over. So many of these workers experienced ongoing exploitation prior to the virus hitting. And now the whole country sees and agrees just how essential they are. This crisis has made clear the role that the care and reproductive economy has. Roles historically gendered. These roles are critical in sustaining and nurturing all of us. And it's clear that they are critical more than ever. This work and the centrality that it plays offers a glimpse into what is possible in the reorganization of day-to-day life towards human need and that of the planet. Thank you all for being on this call, because this is our invitation as a grassroots organizing sector to our friends in philanthropy. A lot of work has been done in the past few years to build this relationship between our sectors. And for us, this is a moment to continue, deepen, and strengthen that trajectory of work. As with all crises, this moment possesses both threats and opportunities. As a significant portion of the world's population are sheltering in place for weeks and perhaps months, here's what we know. Firstly, the problem is deep, and we are seeing and experiencing pervasive suffering, massive social and economic dislocation, and incapacity of the private and public sector to adequately respond to the crisis. Secondly, frontline communities, and by this we mean those communities that suffer the greatest impact of racial, gender, environmental, climate, housing, and other forms of injustices, especially Indigenous, Black, Latinx, immigrant, migrant, Asian Pacific Islander, LGBTQ, remain some of the most exposed and at risk in this moment. There's disproportionate impacts on frontline communities named above. Rates of exposure to COVID-19 and deaths resulting from it far outpace rates in white and wealthier communities. This virus has the potential to wipe out entire nations, languages, and culture. In spite of this vulnerability, in the past month, we have seen organized grassroots and frontline forces rise and advance in this moment. We see communities coming together virtually to share lessons, offer mutual aid, take care of one another, sing, dance, make poetry together, love on each other. Folks are proposing policy solutions, claiming and reclaiming rights that we know are ours fundamentally. We are identifying emergency response mechanisms and leaning into the networks and tools that the Just Recovery Framework is offering. We are calling for moratoriums on rent, mortgages, evictions, and foreclosures. We are calling for an abolition of prisons, those in detention centers, removing people from the cages that they have been placed in. We are demanding a people's bailout, and we are seeing everywhere that philanthropy has a really critical role to play in being able to support, assist, strengthen the work that grassroots and frontline communities are doing. So on that note, I'm going to pass to Cindy Wiesner from Grassroots Global Justice.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much, Don, for that opening, and welcome once again to all our friends and comrades and co-conspirators in philanthropy. Really happy that you're joining us on this Good Friday, on the second day of Passover, and just really acknowledging what people are holding in this moment. So thank you again for joining us this Friday afternoon. So as Don raised, the moment that we're experiencing is unprecedented, and it also brings unprecedented opportunities, right? And it puts our current political, economic, cultural system under a microscope. And we are inviting you to bear witness to this experience across the grassroots organizing sector, but we also invite you to step up into the challenge of what philanthropy can do to be our best selves in this crisis moment. And so we have come up with a framework that we want to share. Later in the call, we'll be sharing it through a slideshow, and we'll be writing this up and sending it out. But I think that this is the best thinking that we've done after checking in with our members, after really talking to a lot of sisters alliances beyond It Takes Roots sister alliances, but really thinking about what is it from the ground on up we're hearing. So there's three main things, right? Is that this is a moment to change the rules, number two, to stop the bad, and then number three, to build the new. So that framework should be familiar with many of you that have been supporting the just transition work that we've been doing, but we've applied it to this current moment and as a framework for us to think about concretely what we can be doing as organizations, as people in motion, and as philanthropy in particular. So the first thing around changing the rules, there's a couple points there. So one, it is incredibly important to help the front lines reclaim the commons. And so I think that one of the things is, I know that it's absolutely a normal reaction to try to step in to fill the gaps of the state's responsibility, but we think that it is important more than ever that healthcare, financial security, shelter, food, protective gear, workers' rights, all should be elements for the public good. And I think that it's important for us for you all to raise your voice and power and expand the commons and really think about it as how to be able to expand and support the public sector and not contract it, right? So I think that's one piece. Number two is an opportunity to change the tax law, right? We don't want to continue wealth being hoarded in perpetuity. And this is a real classic benchmark around the extractive economy. And I think that it's a moment that if we really step into the vision that we want to just transition towards a regenerative feminist economy, that requires change at the source and at the root. It's an opportunity for us to change the law of the annual payment of philanthropic charities to 10% or greater as principal, as the minimum. And I know that that's a big task, but I think it's possible in this moment. And number three, within that is that it's also an opportunity, and many foundations have already done this, and we really appreciate it, is really relaxing restrictions on the use of grants for acquisition of land and capital. So frontline communities are already developing people's solutions to a just transition. But part of this requires self-determination over land and labor, and enabling groups to acquire land and make capital purchases will help propel a people's solution that can house and feed and provide energy and put people to work. So those are some key examples around change the rules. Number two, around stopping the bad. So, you know, I don't know about you, but people are hoarding a lot of toilet paper right now, and no one loves a hoarder. And so part of it is, this is not a time to stop the contraction based on fear and, you know, based on sort of like the stock market. It's a moment to really invest in communities now, right? And it's a moment to continue to divest philanthropic endowments from the extractive economy. So we want to make sure that the return on investments doesn't come from the sectors that extract resources, but that come from the resources that don't come from extracting Mother Earth and human labor. And so I think this is an opportunity as we think about this global recession and global depression that is going to be a reality, is that this is a moment to make very different choices. Letter C, there's an opportunity to streamline emergency funds. So I know many foundations, many folks have been trying to come together to create emergency funds. But I think what is important is that we want to figure out how to not have organizations on the ground be nickel and dime their way through the process of trying to go through all these distinct funds with all these different criterias, but how can there be a coordinated and organized effort to streamline that so that folks can be like, oh, I can go here, and it's streamlined and organized. And then letter D is, how do we get rid and relax reporting requirements, right? I know, again, many foundations have done this, and it's very appreciated, not just in a crisis period, but doing so permanently. You've been hearing from us for years on that. So third point, around building the new. So there is an opportunity to continue building and creating the scaffolding and the movement infrastructure of the grassroots organizing sector. So again, not just for It Takes Roots and not just for our member organizations, but for the whole sector of the grassroots organizing sector. So if you already fund this sector, double, triple down. And if you don't do it now, now is a good time to start, and really encourage your colleagues in philanthropy to do the same. Because I think right now we gotta organize philanthropy to make this a priority sector. Because in a lot of ways, if we understand some of the work that the ground that we've been tilling for the last 10, 20 years, now a lot of the things that seemed unreasonable or seemed not possible, it's in this moment of reconstruction of society that we can offer some of those solutions. And how do we equip the folks on the grassroots organizing sector to create those paths, right? Letter B, we want to encourage folks to fund grassroots groups directly and really support the emergency fund campaigns that It Takes Roots sister alliances have. But I think it's an opportunity not to think about oh, let's centralize it all here, but really fund the ground, right? I think it's incredibly important to do that. And then the last point in the Build Anew is invest in a just transition by investing your dollars to non-extracted loan funds. And that way we can support the frontline-led solutions to transform ownership and move us towards a regenerative feminist economy. So that's our best thinking right now. That's a framework. We will write this up and share this with you all, but I think we want to sort of invite you to think about it as you hear from some of our grassroots leaders and representatives who will be sharing. So I'm very honored to invite my brother here, Yazzie from the Northern Diné, who will be talking about the COVID-19 relief effort. So Chile. Hey, Shilly, unmute yourself, my dear.
I am Chile Yazzie from Shiprock, Navajo Nation. We're located in northwest New Mexico. And the indications that we've been hearing across the country in that COVID-19 is really hard hitting in the indigenous communities as well as colored communities across the country is proven to be true. Very much so here on the Netra, which is Navajo country. And I believe that we've lost 15 tribal members so far. And why this condition is the way it is that we are in an impoverished condition. We are diabetic. We are in the middle of a food desert, which forces our people to consume junk foods at a very alarming rate. We have our people who continue to receive the government commodities, which is high in fat and cholesterol. And then we have heart and respiratory conditions that are compromised due to the pollution that we've been breathing all of our lives here. And of course, also the massive strip coal mining that has been going on. In addition, our immune systems, why our immune systems are compromised is with the cancers and other respiratory conditions that we've been afflicted with the massive uranium mining that's been going on in our country for so many years. And because of our economic condition, which is because of being at the bottom of the food chain here in America, this Kansas democracy that is a government that's by the corporation, for the corporation, and of the corporation, etc. You know, as the gentleman George Carlin said, he says that you have to be asleep to believe in the American dream. Our Indian Health Service hospitals have been chronically and historically been underfunded for so many years that it's just a travesty. And our elders, who are the most susceptible, our elders who are the keepers of our songs and our ceremonies, our stories, they are in grave danger because of their susceptibility to the virus. You know, our poverty condition is also exacerbated by the overcrowded conditions that we have in our homes, which of course makes the entire household that much more susceptible to the virus. And here in my home community, we are an agricultural community. We've been farming for many, many generations here along the San Juan River. And what this virus is forcing us to do is to go back to the land. We have vast farmlands. We have a water rights from the perennial river that flows through our communities. We are being forced to have to go back to our farming to really effect and realize the necessity of having food sovereignty, where we would be able to feed ourselves, where we will be able to feed the people on a regional basis and on an intertribal, even at the intertribal level. And we have been doing this to go back to our farming practices. And but of course, we need that support to help us go big time doing that. We know we can grow food and have animals. All of the food products we put on our tables, we can produce that to a great extent. And you know, one interpretation that we receive here from our medicine people on the COVID-19 is that it's certainly a signal, a message from our beloved Earth Mother, and that the world is going wrong. Her children are being mistreated by government, by the 1%ers, and part of that message is that we truly do need to get away from carbon burning, to get away from the incredible abuse that our Earth Mother has been subjected to for many years. And we truly need to get back on the path to a transition to renewable energy. And as the world knows, our indigenous peoples are at the forefront in defending and advocating for the life of our Earth Mother, because very simply, the life of our Earth Mother translates to life for all life, and life for our future generations, for our grandchildren. So we have a great stake here, and we are committed to defending that to our last breath. That much I have to say for now.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kitzia Esteva. I am a community rights director with Causa, Justa, Just Cause. We are situated in the Bay Area and organize Black and Latino immigrant tenants and fight at the intersection of local and global displacement against the displacement of local communities due to the militarization of urban life through policing and ICE enforcement, and also against gentrification and economic marginalization. Thank you, Chile, for everything you shared. I think that similar to the conditions that we're seeing in the native communities for Causa Justa, we're seeing deep economic marginalization of Black, Latinx, and Asian communities who are historically marginalized and in the urban setting. We are proud of being a member of GGJ, and it takes roots because it gives us the opportunity to connect our local social justice work to international grassroots feminist framework for peace, demilitarization, and the building of a regenerative economy. In the midst of this pandemic, it's strategically imperative to our survival to connect with social justice movement from across the world. Also working to fend off the devastation that is happening right now, and to build true solidarity and transformative solutions. I wanted to share the 5 principles from the statement for feminist foreign policy that are important contributions to this political moment in how we should shape a fight against militarization. The first one is to relocate Pentagon spending towards meeting human needs as outlined by the People's Bailout, including healthcare and paid sick and family leave for all, halting of evictions and foreclosures, and honoring treaty obligations to indigenous peoples. Respecting the extent of the global ceasefire, and extending the global ceasefire, to end active military operations and permanently change course away from endless wars towards peace building, diplomacy, and development. Permanently lift US economic sanctions against Cuba, Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, and 25 other countries. And this one is imperative in this political moment. It's about literally saving lives of people in these countries, and it is something that should not have been in place to begin with. Stop US political, economic, and military support for authoritarian governments, such as Israel and India, that inflict violence on the people of Palestine and Kashmir. And drastically reduce jail, prison, and detention centers populations, and immediately release people from detention conditions that increase the spread of COVID-19. We really must recognize that the militaristic framework that we've had as a society has failed us both domestically and internationally. The massive investments in the Pentagon have wreaked violence and instability around the world. It has supported dictatorships, coups, the quote unquote war on drugs and trafficking, and has resulted in deep imperialism and the displacement of millions of people worldwide. As part of the work that I do is connecting directly with communities coming from the migrant caravan that are arriving to the US from Central America. And I see the direct link of decades of US foreign policy throughout the Americas and how these communities are coming forced to migrate en masse because of the militarization that they've been experiencing in their homelands. And with the coronavirus pandemic that continues to be responded through militarization, we see a continuation of this at the local level through ICE raids in US cities and the increased military presence at our borders. We also are seeing another wave of criminalization of life and criminalization of race from anti-Asian sentiments directed at Asian community right now because of the rise of this pandemic, to the ways in which our communities are being criminalized for surviving, for not being able to observe shelter in place as they're trying to also have their ends meet. So this pandemic really has many important moments of shifting, and in the work that we've been doing in the Bay Area to really make important pivots in this moment to save lives, the lives of our communities during this pandemic. CGJC has been organizing against local law enforcement entanglement with ICE enforcement and for community defense against policing and deportation for several years. And this work became even more urgent during Trump's administration. We are already seeing a public health crisis in detention centers across California and the US. And last year, we pushed for California to close all for-profit detention centers through state legislation. And this quickly became the most pressing call to action in the midst of this pandemic, to really close all detention centers and release our communities to housing where they can be sheltered in place and have access to health services. At the local level, we're also fighting to release all people from local jails, to close the San Francisco Juvenile Justice Hall, and to close the seismically unsafe adult jail without building a new one. In Alameda County, we have one of the deadliest jails in the country, with more than 50 people who have died in the last 5 years due to jail staff violence, abuse, and negligence. We are ultimately, we're calling for the release of those who are vulnerable and immunocompromised, and ultimately the release of everyone, because no one is safe in our jail systems. And leaving them inside is definitely allowing for them to end up in a death sentence. Because of community pressure, we have been able to make important progress to release about 600 inmates in the last 3 weeks. But there's still a lot of work to do to continue to release people. And we really want to begin to expand not just the work around releasing community members, but like closing jails, detention centers, and building the good, right? What's needed for our communities to have welfare and to have what they need to survive and thrive and have a fair chance at a dignified life instead of becoming further criminalized. Again, there's the importance of connecting with the 5 principles of the people's bailouts that prioritize life. One is health is the top priority for all people with no exceptions. Provide economic relief directly to the people. Rescue workers and communities, not corporate executives. Make down payment on a regenerative economy while also preventing future crises, and protect our democratic processes while protecting each other. This is a really important period in which we need to be investing on each other, investing in our communities to be able to regenerate our economy and to come out this crisis with the capacity to rebuild what's gonna be best for our communities in the long haul.
Thank you so much. I think I'm next. My name is Lisa Abbott. I'm a longtime organizer with Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, and I am also honored to serve as co-chair of the Climate Justice Alliance's Energy Democracy Working Group and on the CJA Steering Committee. I'm glad to be with you all, and my deep respect to each of the previous speakers. I've also been asked to just remind all the participants on this webinar to please, if you have questions or comments, things you'd like us to discuss in the Q&A, please put those in the chat and we will take them up. And then I've been asked to try to share with you some short-term, mid-term, and long-term needs and opportunities as seen through our window organizing in Kentucky and with the Climate Justice Alliance. So I'll try to do briefly. Kentucky benefited certainly from the steady leadership and early actions of our Democratic governor, who was elected last fall by 5,000 votes. And we're all very aware of the difference that that election has made in this moment. As a result, we have a lower and slower disease curve, but the disease is still devastating. We have just under 1,500 cases, and they are in 97 of 120 counties in Kentucky. So we are experiencing this virus in all of our communities, rural, urban, small town. It's spreading most rapidly in nursing homes and through church gatherings at the moment. Racial disparities in the lethality of this disease in Kentucky reflect what we are seeing everywhere. Even so, because Kentucky is predominantly a white state, more than 87% of the COVID cases in Kentucky are white. As is true for other states throughout Central Appalachia and in the South, 46% of adult Kentuckians are considered at high risk due to underlying health conditions that have been described really well by Chile and others, including high rates of COPD, diabetes, cancer, black lung disease from mining, and other risk factors. In terms of how the economic crisis is affecting us, the national story is also our story. We're facing extreme job losses, crashing revenue for local governments, and many businesses that are closed and failing. The immediate policy responses that we've seen in Kentucky at the state level have been critical and significantly positive. Kentucky moratorium on evictions and all utility shutoffs. We expanded Medicaid access. We expanded who's eligible for unemployment. And the state is continuing to pay child care centers, even though they have shut down. So they're paying for enrollment, not for attendance, which is huge. But the immediate needs are overwhelming. A Lexington-based food bank said yesterday that they typically serve 25 families a week. And on Wednesday of this week, they served 600 people. One particular vulnerability we face in Kentucky are miners with black lung disease. 1 in 5 Central Appalachian miners still on the job today has black lung disease, and tens of thousands more are sick at home and very vulnerable to this disease. As we move towards a just recovery in the midterm, some needs and opportunities we see: a huge need to focus on mental health, on child abuse and neglect, on domestic abuse, and on the economic and social needs of people who are isolated and at risk for many factors. As an organization, we're working to do our part. We've set up a resource page for our members with links to local and regional mutual aid networks and many other ways to take action to support each other. We also organizationally recently announced a 2-week pause. We called it a BIBO break, or a breathe in, breathe out break, where we encouraged all of our staff and leaders to take the time they need to care for themselves and their families and their communities. We stayed open in this time, but most meetings and non-essential work was pushed forward. We've also surveyed our staff, and we're in the process of surveying our 12,000 members to learn more about the specific impacts, needs, and concerns, and ways to support each other. Within our communities, there's a huge need for direct transfers of money to people, money to state and local governments, and money to nonprofits. This requires much more, obviously, from the federal government and from philanthropy. We've got to move money to help communities sustain basic services before they can rebuild. Ultimately, as Cindy said, that will require significant wealth taxes. And as Kitzia has just said, it will require significant demilitarization. As we respond, community organizations, governments, and philanthropy have to bring a racial justice lens, economic justice lens, and environmental justice lens to every action and investment we make. This disease affects us all, but it's much more lethal for Black, Brown, and Indigenous folks and for white folks. And our responses and recovery actions must address those underlying structural factors. In the midterm, we've got to figure out how to cancel people's rent and how to cancel utility bills for months at a time. Not just freeze them, but cancel them. We'll hear more about that. In the midterm, frontline organizations have a critical role to play in helping our members and people in our communities make meaning in this moment. And we're using every tool at our disposal: social media and webinars, certainly, but also phone banking and virtual book clubs and virtual cultural sharing and virtual rallies and so much more. This is a moment when people are really questioning everything and needing to make meaning together, even as we distance. In the midterm, we've still got to play defense and push back as fossil fuel industries are trying to benefit from this crisis to save their own hides. As you may know, on March 26th, the US EPA announced a temporary, retroactive, and indefinite pause on most monitoring and enforcement of most environmental laws. Oil, gas, and coal industries, whose business models were collapsing long before this crisis, are now pushing for massive bailouts for themselves. In the long term, as we think about the longer term and what's needed for a just transition to a regenerative economy, I want to offer just a few thoughts from our window in Kentucky. One, this election coming up really matters. And as we and other groups shift our strategies to voters, we continue to talk about the solution and the vision that our communities have always needed about healthcare, jobs that don't sacrifice our air, land, water, and climate, about a fair and healthy democracy, about a just transition for workers and communities that are most affected by job losses, environmental devastation, poverty, and racism. In the long term, grassroots community-based organizations have an essential role to play in exposing the broken systems and assumptions and helping people shape new meaning and build new power. For us, being part of the Climate Justice Alliance and being connected with our sister alliances on this call has opened up many really important ways for our KFTC members to learn, sharpen their political analysis, and make meaning together. And in turn, our members and staff are contributing through CJA and other sister alliances in helping to advance Green New Deal strategies at the local, state, and national levels. CJA's work on the Green New Deal starts where we always begin, by strengthening the capacity of frontline organizations to lead locally and at levels extending to globally. 45 of CJA's 70 member organizations have stepped up to participate in a Green New Deal working group. And at the national level, we're working with all the sister alliances on this call to build a united front to advance Green New Deal solutions. That work is very fast moving, it's inspiring, it's shaped by a lot of the leadership of people on this call. I encourage you all to visit the site, the People's Bail, Kitzia, which was created by groups working for a Green New Deal. And it's an example of how we are trying to respond to this crisis while holding up our core principles and a vision for a just transition to a regenerative economy. And lastly, I want to encourage us all to remember that the long-term solutions we need to respond to this crisis and to shape a just transition are not monolithic. Our communities face similar problems, but as you've already heard, the conditions differ as you move from one community to another across the country and around the world. So while our path is uncertain, we know that a just transition relies on strong visionary organizing by diverse organizations who are committed to working together in aligned and intersectional movement building and power building ways for transformative change. For me, that's what the organizations on this call represent, and we are really rolling with all of y'all. I want to pass to Roberto now from Renters United for Justice.
Thank you, everybody. My name is Roberto from Inquilinxs Unidos por Justicia, or Renters United for Justice. And I want to first acknowledge everybody on the call for putting their minds, bodies, hearts in the middle of this crisis. We know it's intense. We know we have this really deep-seated stress in all of our bodies. And instead of freezing, we are acting, we are moving, and we are attempting to change. And so I want to acknowledge and send love to everybody out there right now. I'm co-director of a tenant outfit here in Minneapolis. And I think crises or crisis, and many times demonstrate the system for what it is, mainly a sham. I'm on the front lines right now organizing against lords of the land. This is what we're doing. And it's very evident that we're organizing against lords of the land. And I think something that's just very prevalent here is how invisible. In Minneapolis, there was 2 complaint-driven inspectors for over 90,000 units, mainly Black, Indigenous, people of color, single women, refugees, who were subsequently paying 70% profit margins to these landlords for receiving a product that was completely terrible. And so what we've been doing in many ways is when we first started the organization, there were these lords of the land that were charging Latinos $500 to open their window in the winter, or for children playing in the green space, mass intimidation. And the city was essentially letting it happen. And before the communities came together and said, ya basta, stop, to organize a different way. And this was how the system operated. Homeowners in the neighborhoods, other higher class renters in the neighborhoods felt like everything was okay when it just really wasn't okay. And so I'm coming at you from the perspective of building renter power from the ground up. And in the future, and what we're doing right now, just to provide a little context, is we're organizing in some of the most affordable units in Minneapolis to force landlords to sell buildings back to tenants, at the same time build strong tenant unions that can push back against the city and create a city in which renter power is actually on the map, in which landlord power doesn't exist in terms of lying to inspectors and letting these profit margins run amok. And I think something that has been prevalent during the COVID shift in our time is we've gone back to our members and we've asked what it is we need to do during this time. And many people, it wasn't even a possibility to pay rent. I mean, this was completely impossible. And so we had to think of different ways and different understandings to actually get back for what our renters need. Because in our base and in our communities, they don't compromise. It's not like saying we're going to just accept this pittance and then we're going to be okay with it. When you're actually moving with communities slowly, when you're listening, when you're building strategy with them, I think there is a very deep-seated understanding that we're not going to take what isn't justice. We don't want just $5,000 to pay back to our landlords and so that the system can run perfectly as the status quo wants it to. And what we've been saying here is we need a massive cancel the rent campaign. We need a massive cancel the rent campaign where you provide mortgage relief, utility relief, and canceling the rent during the times of crisis. And so what this campaign has done is it sparked fire nationally and locally, in which we're in communication with the governor's office, with the attorney general here in Minnesota, Ilhan Omar, and many other council members who we have worked with on the ground to push back and to say, this isn't enough just to say we want a stimulus check that's going to go straight to landlords, but rather we need something more. because landlords right now are ruthless. I'm going to be honest. In the buildings that we work in, the late fees are piling up. They're threatening eviction, even though there's a moratorium in Minneapolis. And it's not only what a law will do, how it will protect people, but landlords will still, and people in power will still use it in their advantage. And so something that we're thinking in the community is, if the landlords don't have the tool of oppression of eviction, how are they going to take it into their own hands in the United States? How private property is sanctimonium. How are they going to take it into their own hands? And we're trying to build defense for after the crisis, because we know there's going to be a backlash. And so if we don't have this cancel the rent campaign, we're not going to be able to actually defend communities in a beautiful way. And one thing that's been pretty remarkable is we're in the middle of a fight right now to purchase the buildings, decommodify a set of 5 buildings, 100 people, 34 families, in which we're creating a cooperative. And the tenants have been on rent strike. They've taken their landlord to court numerous times. They've won money back. They've repaired the buildings themselves. And now they're saying, we want to purchase the buildings and create affordable housing forever. And in this cooperative, even though it's intense and we're still fighting against eviction, what have they decided to do? They've taken a pause. And they said, the most important thing is that we give back to our community. And so the cooperative has opened up a food distribution network themselves. They've connected to the allies, they've connected to other farmers, and now we're receiving massive donations to distribute food packages across Minneapolis, not only in the cooperative, not only to our members, to anybody who needs it. And I think these are the types of communities that we want to build resilience and we want to build power around. That when crisis happens, organized communities will give organized solutions, and we will be ready and we will be there to demonstrate what we've always been doing, which is loving, caring, and building with one another. And it's been beautiful to see. It's been beautiful to take a step back. It's been hard. It's been hard to see these landlords really go on the offensive. And not only the landlords, but some of the government officials that are supposedly on our side, and some of the others who have said, well, we just want the system just as it is. We're going to bail out the airlines and we're going to leave the postal service high and dry. And so I think as we build now more of a tenacity, the COVID shift has called us to be bigger once again. And so what we're attempting to do is not only organize against certain portfolios of landlords in Minneapolis, but we're expanding our model big. We are coming out with an organizing guideline, maybe a fire starter, if you will, that teaches our member organizations that we work with to build tenant union power, and to build tenant union power that can transition itself into territorial power that can actually push and change different solutions on the ground. And so with that, I want to pass to Kaliakun.
All right. First, my name is Kali Akuno with Cooperation Jackson, based in Jackson, Mississippi. He, him, anything said with love and respect. My first little pause on this, and you heard me take that breath, is because of the number of people I know who have passed from COVID-19. That number is growing over internationally and here in the United States. There's over 50 people I know who have transpired from this, many of them close friends and comrades, and many people who I worked and struggled with in New Orleans in particular, in the housing struggle there right after Hurricane Katrina. So this has been very real and personal. In many respects for myself. Here in our own community, you know, we mirror everything that you're hearing in regards to the disparities between Black people in particular being subject to this virus, and more so subject to the gross inequalities that exist within the system. People's lack of health care, lack of access to healthcare, it's been really borne out here in Mississippi. I'll mention a couple of things that I haven't heard to this point, not because they're not on our minds, but just to raise them up. Number one, we know, and we can tell you from our direct experience in our community here in West Jackson, that there's a gross undercount of both who's infected and both who's dying. And that needs to be acknowledged. We need to raise a real struggle to really acknowledge who's not with us and who's missing from our communities. Personally was witness to that again in New Orleans, where we never got an official death count after Hurricane Katrina of those who passed. We can't let that crime go on again. We know similar things have taken place also in Puerto Rico. So I want to uplift that. There's also a tremendous amount of undercounting which is taking place in the prisons here in Mississippi. We are in the midst of a very severe prison struggle crisis, where earlier this year there were upwards to 50 deaths due to just grotesque conditions that were taking place within the state and the gross negligence of the rulers of this state, this large plantation in effect. So these things are definitely taking place. And as folks have spoke to us, so I won't repeat that, you know, the Black, Latino, Indigenous communities are being hit hard by this. That is not by accident. Those are all structural things that we need to take place and very much center on us changing the rules, us fighting back, and then also building new structures. For us initially, just as an organization, just to understand how we've been trying to set up from this. Number one, we have a good number of veterans, as I spoke to, of folks who struggled with the disaster that was the government's response after Hurricane Katrina. So a lot of our Build and Fight program has really been oriented in part for trying to address moments like this, knowing that they were replete within our most recent history, and then given our analysis of the climate calamity we believe is coming and which is already emerging, trying to dig in and be able to do as much local production and have as much community autonomy as possible. It's very much what Cooperation Jackson's program has been built around. But, you know, we didn't anticipate this virus really occurring. So many of the initial things that we tried to do in terms of starting a mutual aid program, which was our first kind of instinctive response, we were told very quickly by folks and comrades that we have worked with very closely in Italy, doing mutual exchange with, to stop doing that, because we did not have the personal protective gear in order to be able to really engage with our community in the ways that we know how, that would keep everybody safe, particularly given the number of preconditions that our membership has around diabetes in particular, but also other forms of cardiovascular issues and asthma, which I suffer from myself. So in the wake of that, we kind of shut down our initial programs. We kept the food production going. We then tried to reshift all of our processes and work to expand the food production, trying to learn how to do it with extreme social distancing, which we've somewhat mastered, but still trying to figure out what was the concrete need, something that we could do with our resources, as limited they are, but what could we do? We were challenged by some nurses within our membership to start making masks. And we took that on, and we've been doing this mass production challenge in 2 ways now for almost 3 weeks. So one, we have a team of 5 people who are sewing masks and cranking that out as fast as they can. They produce several hundred at this point, but you know the demand is far exceeding our capacity. So we've been encouraging other forces in the community to take that up. Many people are. Then also trying to use some of our unique capability here in Jackson, which is utilizing our 3D printing facilities in our community production cooperative to make more surgical and more medical qualified masks. And we've been perfecting that particular path and expanding our production there, you know, to really try to meet the community need, recognizing that this doesn't replace what both the government should be doing and what the response is. Our response, as hard as our people are working, it is still grossly inadequate to the need. When these are things that within this country and its industrial capacity, if there was a true democratic organization of our industries in our productive capacity, we could have shifted and dealt with the need to produce the masks, the respirators, the PPE, the protective gowns most immediately, which clearly indicates that this is a crisis both of leadership, but it's also a systemic crisis of not really having our priorities set around human needs as opposed to being prioritized around profit, which has thus far remained the guiding orientation of how this crisis is being met, both by the government, the federal government in particular, but also by the major industries in this country. So we want to just really drill down on the need to really shift our practices and encourage everyone to shift in the need, all of you, in the philanthropic sector, to shift towards the efforts that you see all of us doing to expand on what we are calling community production, so that we can do more local production that will actually be addressed to human needs on a real human scale, dealing with what the community says directly that it wants and what it needs. This is going to require a major transformation of all the industries in this country. So there's a major organizing drive we need to do in that regard and need your support in really advancing. And we support all of the demands that have been issued and stated thus far, but a couple of ones that we definitely want to raise is the major transfer and the democratization of the productive capacity of this country. I think we can't understate that enough, just given the crisis that we are confronting and what we think, given from our own practice, what we can do when we set the priorities towards human need. I think we, all of us, are examples of that, but we have to figure out how to scale that up, and that is what we need your support in helping this, making this a reality for millions of people throughout the United States. So I'll end there for now.
All right, thank you so much. I want to just give a virtual applause and hug and a lot of love to all of our speakers. Folks can put it in the chat, show your love for Don, Chili, Kitzia, Lisa, Roberto, and Kali. Just a lot of, I think, we could have picked 5 other folks, and just really representing a lot of the grit and reality that folks are doing in terms of trying to be responsive on the ground and at the same time hold this visionary, transformative vision, because I think that's what's important, right? And just the strength of so much of what we've been working on, from Native food sovereignty to freeing them all from detention centers to prisons, right? To a feminist foreign policy that talks about demilitarization, to a people's bailout and not bailing out the CEOs or banks and transnational corporations, to a just recovery, right? And a just transition, and then canceling rent, canceling mortgages, canceling utilities, and really thinking about what does it mean to have a society and with everyone having a home, and how do we have immediate needs met through mutual aid, but then also community production. So these are just some of the examples of our responses. We want to have folks write their questions in the chat box. We have a couple of questions that folks that we will assign to each, 1 question per person, but we will definitely do a follow-up in terms of some of the questions that don't get asked here. And so folks will have about 1.5 minutes to respond. These are very big questions, but I think we'll do a deeper sort of response in our follow-up with you all. So there was a question that I'm gonna ask that was asked by Regan. Thank you so much, Regan, asking a question, and I'm gonna toss this to Dawn. Can you say more about what it looks like for philanthropy to both support immediate relief, but also in a way that demands a deeper commitment to the commons.
Thank you, Regan. Thank you, Cindy. So I think one of the things that is becoming very clear about this moment, and I think we've, to Kali and other folks' point, we've been trying to learn lessons from prior crises. You know, this is not the first. This is not the first threat that we are facing as a sector and as communities and peoples. So I think one of the things is that we've been thinking about is the need for phases of response, phases of work. So one, I think if there can be a sense by our philanthropic partners that at every point, we as a sector can and will be sharpening our assessment of the specific needs of that moment. I think what you're hearing right now is there is a tremendous need for mutual aid support. There's a tremendous need for the immediate solutions, the things that actually will save lives today, the things that our folks are doing to put food on the table and to show up for those in our communities and our neighborhoods that are sick, right? So this is really critical. But as you all know, we are not a short-sighted sector, and we are not short-sighted movements. We have long-term vision, we have long-term goals, right? So in the case of the work that Roberto is talking about happening in Minneapolis, there's both the work of organizing tenants today. The cancel rent demand is a short-term need and a short-term fight, as is a lot of the other shorter-term needs that folks have talked about on the call. You know, needing to call in to our district attorneys to get folks out of detention and incarceration today. Those are short-term needs. And then many of us are either simultaneously or will be pivoting in deeper ways in time at different junctures and at different points to then be able to, in some ways, take up and move from this very kind of immediately responsive need to some of the longer term stuff. So I think it's both and. Can philanthropy and our partners in philanthropy follow us in some ways through the twists and turns? Can you all be responsive as we are articulating evolving needs and evolving support and how that looks at different junctures, and imagining this being a long recovery, right? Both a long recovery and part of a long-term strategy for transformation that is not new to us as a sector, and it's not new in the conversations that we've been having with you all. I think this is why the ask that Cindy put out in terms of the need to actually just increase the overall pie is the final thing that I would say, right? So I think what you're hearing from us is both follow us as the needs evolve, shift, and change, be as responsive as possible, and actually expand the pie significantly, immediately double, immediately triple what is accessible and available to us as a sector and as formations and organizations in this moment, because we actually are in a position in many places to do both the immediate and the longer term simultaneously.
Thank you, Don. The next question is for Chile. Chile, Sarah Mersha asked, have oil, gas, and other similar industries benefited from Trump's corporate bailouts? Are there ways to stop that from continuing? Chile?
There's difficulty in contending with that because our tribal government relies heavily on industry, extractive industry for our tribal budget, and it's been that way for many decades. So our mill structure, our tribal leaderships are going to have to change their mindsets to truly understand what the transition concept is about, I think that it's just a really powerful and difficult dynamics that we have to deal with today, just simply because our travel budgets depend on the revenues from extractive industry by maybe even as much as 70%.
That's right. That's why we got to keep on this whole notion of like bailing out people and you know, we've been engaged in the struggle in terms of impacting the stimulus processes because we know how that goes. The next question for Kitzia. Kitzia, there was a question about wanting to hear examples of communities fighting and winning government support, even at state and or local levels, for undocumented people at this time who aren't able to access federal funds.
Yes, thank you. And I will say that that's very much in the Bay Area is something that it's in the process of being fought for. We are not yet in a place where we have we can call victory on specifically our local cities and counties providing resources that the federal government is refusing to provide for highly marginalized undocumented communities. There are undocumented funds that are being created. A lot of it is grassroots fundraising right now. We're pushing the city of San Francisco and Alameda County to incorporate themselves in that and be part of supporting criminalized immigrant communities that don't have access to federal resources. And I think there's also the bigger picture, right, of mutual aid and the need for our communities to have a solidarity economy. And this period pushes that even to a higher place because in the immigrant rights movement, for the last 4 years, we've been fighting to sustain our rapid response money to be able to have hotlines, to be able to respond to our communities as they're being targeted. But the reality is that can only take us so far. And the fight for building structural conditions for our people to have long-term investment in their own economic sustainability, it's primordial to being able to have self-determination. And so I think it's important for us as we're pushing for these undocumented funds, we're also connecting that to a larger fight to create economically sustainable mutual aid. And it is really important, right, that in this period, we understand that the resources that need to be allocated to rapid response are not separate from organizing for long-term, fixes and solutions to our needs. And, Don was talking about the assessments in real time and like the needs for us to move and pivot with our community because they're learning on the ground as we're facing the crisis, how to continue to build those solutions for long-term. So I invite you to both support efforts on DocuFunds, but also in the work that will continue to support us to create a restorative economy.
Thank you, Kitzia. A couple more questions. So for Kali, there was a question from Jennifer Neer. And it's a question about what types of support would be most helpful from philanthropy in this moment to support just transition projects and loan funds. I think one of the things that just, for example, GGJ right now, our board decided last week that we are going to invest some of our resources into the seed commons, and we want to ask philanthropy to also join in that effort. What is this moment like? How is it that we're beginning to think forward and make sort of that down payment for the future? So Kali, if you can answer that question, please.
I'll try to be as brief as I can. It's a long-term question, but I was going to uplift the seed commons piece, Cindy, and I think there's several other funds like that, scattered throughout the country that definitely need to be uplifted and supported. One of the, I think Don raised it very early on that I think is very critical, both to meet some immediate needs, but also I think some of our long-term strategic needs, and that is freeing up and changing some of the rules and guidelines to allow many of our different organizations to do different types of capital acquisitions, particularly of facilities for housing and for different types of production, be it food or be it some of the things that we are trying to do. That is going to be of a long-term critical need. We know both from this crisis and some of the previous ones that will enable our communities to do a number of different things autonomously once some of the institutions fail us, so that we have the capacity to kind of do some of the things on our own to keep fighting. So that's my short-term answer of where I think where and how we should make some shifts in the investments.
Thank you, Kali. The next question is for Lisa. Lisa, so Catherine asks, sort of, it's almost a follow-up to Regan's question, right? Is how to expand public support. How do we leverage public funds towards these commons and self-determination? What are strategies that move government money towards the commons and the organizing roles within philanthropy that can play in that effort, right? So in addition to pushing for wealth tax and demilitarization from the 5 to 10% payouts.
Yeah, thanks. I have a couple thoughts to this. I also have a brief response to an earlier question if there's time, so I'll try to be brief. I think we have an opportunity to invest in meaning making, which I was speaking to before. Right now we have these laboratories of where government public action is creating benefits for the common good and where lack of action or corrupt action is harming. We're seeing in real time, like in Kentucky, we have a Democratic governor, but we also have a senator with the virus because he didn't believe in it, and another senator who is the Lord of Darkness, right? And so people are seeing in real time these different approaches to the role of government, the function of government. And I think we have an opportunity to invest in communications and in organizing that is helping people process all of this and rethink what is the public good and what is the role of government. And then more specifically, I think investing in organizing around a Green New Deal, which is a framework and an agenda to move resources at the local level, at the state level, and ultimately we're going to move it at the national level towards the commons, towards a just transition, towards solutions that can benefit address the economic crisis and the climate crisis and the racial disparity crisis all at once. So that's my short answer. I also think investing in organizing and voter engagement, right? We gotta change who's in power. That's my short answer. And then specifically on the question about oil, gas, and coal bailouts, there was a fight in this last stimulus bill, and the oil and gas industry did not get the $3 billion bailout that they were after, but they're still at it. And specifically, the coal industry has put a request into Congress to specifically let them stop paying into the Black Lung Disability Trust Fund as a response to a crisis where people are dying because they can't breathe. That's what the coal industry thinks it deserves in this moment, is to not have to pay into that fund anymore. So that's an ongoing fight. They haven't won it yet.
That's right. Thank you, Lisa. Fuera Trump and fuera Mitch McConnell. Okay. So the next question, the last question, folks should keep putting in their questions. We will commit to try to answer the questions that people put out in terms of strategy and more concrete recommendations. And so if you have a question that hasn't been answered, that is important. So the last question goes to my compañero Roberto. There's a question about, do you have any guidance for donors, funders who are thinking about what percentage of their giving should be going to direct material needs like rapid response funds for undocumented members versus general operating support for organizing? And Isaac says they shouldn't be pitted against each other, but I think trying to think about it strategically.
Yeah, thanks everyone for the questions. Yeah, I do like that, not pitting it against each other. Of course, general operating operates in such a way where we can be flexible with many different things. And I do want to just get away from this idea of what quick relief and quick aid is necessary. But what our organizations are doing are always embedded in long-term needs. And so as we give quick relief and quick aid, we are also giving at the production and the creation of long-term movement. Because the creation of the food distribution network, or the families that we represent who may or may not have papers in this country, we're there with them, and we're always going to be there with them, and we're not going to stop. And so I think it's prevalent and it's necessary to have this in the forefront of our minds of who is left out, who won't be touched, who isn't being talked about, such as Callie spoke about. But at the same time, think about what allows for maximum flexibility to build long-term solutions, and then continue that understanding in the long run.
Thank you so much, Roberto. So right now, again, there's been many questions, and we will respond to them. I want to thank our speakers on the briefing for a powerful, inspiring series of just, again, visionary demands and immediate relief. I know there's been some questions around international organizing, and we have been, very connected as Takes Roots and as GGJ. In fact, we had a call yesterday, and we've been talking about what does it mean to also dialogue and think about opportunities to strengthen, because this COVID has also shown it has no borders, and we need to think about this in a global perspective. And there's no just transition that's fair and just only within the context of the US borders, and we got to think about it in a much broader way. I think that I'm going to ask for the slide deck to go up. I just want to remind folks, right, sort of the ask and the sort of framework that we're asking people to really think about. It's an opportunity for us to keep changing the rules. A lot of you guys are rule breakers and rule changers. And so we know that you're already in solidarity with us, but I think this is an opportunity to push like we haven't before. And, we've been saying, organize yourselves. And there's so many ways in which because this could be a moment to really push to make the ideas that we had into reality. And so by helping Frontlines reclaim the commons, by changing the tax law, and by relaxing restrictions of the use of grants for acquisition of land and capital, right? That's one sort of concrete thing. And you heard some of the stories and the reasons why we're putting that framework. The second is around stopping the bad, right? It's an opportunity for us to stop the bad. No one loves a hoarder, and there's going to be a normal reaction to contract, but this is not a moment to be able to do that. And we got to think about it strategically. And so one of the frameworks that I've been really putting out is that we got to think about this as 4 phases, right? There's the immediate moment. So not philanthropy shouldn't spend down right now. Don't do the work of the state. We have to push for the role of good government. So but there is some needs that are not going to be met, and there is some level of immediate relief, but then there's a just recovery, and the just recovery that's going to take probably years, right? And what does that look like? But then there's the moment of just transition, where we then continue to then practice and build up the infrastructure of the new society. And then there's the vision of the new economy, which is the regenerative feminist economy for some, right? And so I think if you think about it over time, that's the way to be able to set and understand then where and how you put your investments and how you then decide to do that. So, but we urge you to divest from philanthropic endowments from the extractive economy, and then to streamline those emergency funds, right? Folks, we're gonna tell you, organize yourself to make it easier. And then the last piece is build the new. We really think it's so important now more than ever, fund grassroots organizing sector, fund people directly, think about ways in which you, double, triple down to then continue building out that movement ecosystem, that scaffolding, right? That's so necessary, and really investing in a future, right? Invest in a just transition and being able to do that. So with that, folks, we are really glad that you heard the spectrum of the impacts of COVID-19 across frontline communities across the country, including the devastation and the tragedy and the human impact on the people and the planet. But we also heard inspiration, right, and hope that's coming from people, because that is the one thing they cannot take away from us, right? They cannot take our hope for a better world. And I think we want to be able to ask you to be co-conspirators with us, to amplify what's needed at this moment. And so want to thank you and really appreciate you and joining us on today, on Good Friday, on Passover, and really appreciate people spending time. And we will be following up with you and all the registrants with additional material and inspiration. Materials and inspiration and information, sorry. So thank you so much to everybody. And thanks to all our speakers, and thanks to the It Takes Roots development and resource team that pulled this together so quickly. These folks are our worker bees that are doing this work in the service of all of our organizations. So thank you to our funder allies, and thank you and good afternoon to everybody.